The Remington revolver on the windowsill caught the morning light, its cylinder empty since she'd used it to hammer a nail into the fence post back in April. Elara Wescott scraped hominy from the iron pot into a tin pail, the metal clinking soft and steady. Outside, the Rhode Island Red scratched and muttered by the coop, waiting. She carried the pail across the yard, her boots leaving prints in the dust that had settled overnight. The shirt hung on the line. Blue chambray, sleeves pinned straight, buttons polished. It had hung there for 341 days. She washed it every Tuesday. The collar was starting to fade. Elara was 26 years old. She had been married for 14 months before Samuel rode north. Before the letter stopped coming. Before she stopped expecting the creak of saddle leather at dusk. She fed the chickens. She mended a tear in the grain sack. She swept the front step of the cabin and did not look at the mountains. The morning was September 12, 1882. Temperature 63 degrees. Wind out of the southeast, carrying the smell of dry grass and the distant promise of rain that would probably miss them again. She wiped her hands on her apron and went inside. The revolver sat on the sill like a paperweight. A .44 caliber Remington model 1858, the blued steel worn at the grip from someone's palm. Not hers. Samuel's. She ran her thumb across the cylinder, counting the 6 empty chambers like rosary beads. She could sell it. Martin at the Mercantile had offered $14 back in July. Said he had a buyer in Abilene who collected army surplus. $14 would fix the sag in the barn roof before winter. She picked up the hammer instead. The nail head was flush with the fence post now, driven clean. She remembered the weight of the revolver in her fist that day. The surprise at how well it worked. How easy it was to use a thing for something it was never meant for. She set the hammer down. The truth, if she let herself think it, was that she wasn't keeping the gun to sell it. She was keeping it because it still smelled faintly of Samuel's hands. Because it was the last thing he'd touched before he rode out. Because as long as it sat on that sill, some part of him was still in the cabin with her. She pinched the bridge of her nose and breathed slow. Then she heard the horse. It wasn't a hoofbeat. It was the rhythm. Too uneven. Too slow. A horse that had been ridden too hard for too long, now walking because it had nothing left to give. Elara stepped to the door. The chipped blue paint was warm under her palm. The man came out of the tree line at the east pasture. He was slumped forward in the saddle, one hand pressed hard against his ribs. His other hand held the reins loose, like he'd forgotten they were there. Dust caked the dark stain on his thigh all the way down to his boot. She did not move. The horse walked straight to the well. It knew where water was. The man did not dismount so much as fall, his boots hitting the stone coping hard, his knees buckling. He grabbed the edge of the well to stay upright. His belt was empty. No holster. No gun. He lifted his head. His face was scratched, dried blood along his jaw, eyes pale grey and struggling to focus. He looked at her standing in the doorway. He looked at the shirt on the line. His voice came out raw. Cracked. They're 3 hours back. The spurs scraped the stone. A long, slow drag of metal as he tried to push himself upright and failed. The sound carried across the yard like a dull bell. Elara's fingers found the doorframe. Her heart was doing something she didn't have words for. Not fear. Not anger. Something older. Something that remembered winter before there was wood split for the stove. She looked at the revolver on the sill. 6 empty chambers. She looked at the hammer in her hand. 3 hours. The man at the well was breathing in shallow pulls, each one catching in his chest like he was swallowing splinters. His horse lowered its head and nosed the trough. The water rippled. The man watched it, his reflection broken and wavering. Elara set the hammer down. She walked to the well. Up close, he was older than she'd first thought. Maybe 40. Crow's feet at his eyes from years of squinting into sun and distance. His shirt was wool, too heavy for September, stained dark across the ribs. She could see where the bullet had passed through. Entry in front, exit behind. He'd packed the wound with a torn piece of his own bandana. It had stopped bleeding, but not recently. Inside, she said. He looked at her. Not grateful. Not pleading. Just registering the instruction, the same way he'd registered the well. Can't, he said. You can or you can't. Which is it? He blinked. Slow, like he was translating her words from a language he'd once known. Can't bring this to your door. She looked at the wound again, at the blood that had soaked through wool and leather and was now drying black in the creases of his knuckles. It's already at my door, she said. Get up. He made it 20 feet before his legs gave. She caught him under the arm, his weight sudden and overwhelming, her shoulder burning as she braced him against her. He smelled of horse sweat and iron and the particular sourness of a fever waiting to break. They moved across the yard like dancers who'd never met. Each step a negotiation. His boots dragging trenches in the dust. Her jaw tight, counting steps like fence posts. The chipped blue door. Across the threshold. The cot by the cold hearth. He collapsed onto it and did not move. She cut his shirt off with shears. The wool parted unevenly, strands catching in the dried blood. The wound was clean, as far as she could tell. No swelling yet. No red streaks. Whoever had patched him on the trail had known what they were doing. She poured well water into a basin, tore strips from an old flour sack, pressed cool cloth to his ribs and watched his breathing steady. His eyes were closed now, but his hand, the one that had been pressed to the wound, had fallen open on the blanket. The palm was calloused. The fingers curved slightly, as if still holding something. A gun. A saddle horn. A life she knew nothing about. She pulled the blanket to his chin and stood. The afternoon stretched long. She did not go back to the fence. She did not pick up the hammer. She stood at the window, the Remington at her elbow, and watched the eastern tree line. 3 hours, he'd said. The sun moved. The shadows lengthened. The chickens settled into their coop, clucking softly to one another. She looked at the revolver, then at the man on the cot, then at the blue shirt on the line, swaying gently in the September breeze. 341 days. She had waited so long for someone to come back through those trees. She just never thought it would be a stranger. The light began to soften toward evening. The wind shifted. Somewhere, far off, a dog barked twice and fell silent. The man on the cot opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling, at the beams she and Samuel had raised together in the first month of their marriage, at the hooks where Samuel's traps used to hang before she'd packed them away. Then he looked at her. I didn't know where else to go, he said. His voice was quiet. Not an excuse. Not a plea. Just a fact, offered up like the last coin in a pocket. Elara said nothing. She turned back to the window. The tree line was still clear. The sky was turning amber. Another day, almost done. She thought about the nail in the fence post, the one she'd hammered with the butt of Samuel's gun. She thought about the roof that still needed patching before winter. She thought about $14 and what it could buy and what it could never replace. Her thumb found the cylinder of the revolver. She pressed lightly. It did not turn. It was empty, and it would stay empty, and that was a choice she had made every morning for nearly a year. Tomorrow, she would have to make it again. But tonight, there was a man on her cot and 3 hours between her door and whatever was coming. She did not know his name. She did not ask. She just stood at the window, watching the light fade, and waited to see what arrived first, the darkness or the men who rode inside it. Her knuckles were white on his vest. Elara hadn't meant to grip him that hard. But he was heavy, heavier than he looked, and the fever was starting to wake up in his bones. His arm hung loose over her shoulder, his boots dragging trenches behind them, and all she could think was, *3 hours. He said 3 hours. She got him to the cot. His knees buckled before she could lower him, and he dropped the last 6 inches like a sack of feed corn. The wool blanket bunched under him. His head lolled back. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Her lower back was damp. She hadn't noticed sweating. The ladle clattered against the bucket. She dipped it deep, brought it up dripping, and held it to his lips. The first splash ran down his chin. The second caught. He swallowed like a man remembering how. His throat moved. Once. Twice. She poured again. The water tasted like her own well always did. Mineral, clean, the faint memory of iron. But it tasted different now, here, in this moment. It tasted like a door she was choosing to open. She stood by the cot and counted his breaths. 23 in a minute. Too fast. His skin had gone waxy at the temples. The wound on his side was clean, but clean wasn't the same as healed. Clean was just the beginning. She looked at her hands. Then at the door. The nail was still in the fence post. She'd hammered it there 6 months ago, the revolver but solid and familiar in her palm. She remembered how the wood had split slightly, how she'd had to angle the nail to catch solid grain, how the gun had felt like a tool and not a weapon. She walked outside. The September air hit her face, cool now in the way that meant evening was serious about arriving. The chickens ignored her. The shirt on the line swayed. She knelt by the fence post. The nail head was smooth from weather. She worked her fingers under the edge and pulled. It resisted at first, 6 months of wood swelling around steel, then gave with a soft, wooden groan. Her thumb ached. A dull, deep throb that travelled up into her wrist. She carried the nail inside. She set it on the table. She picked up the revolver. The cylinders turned one by one. Asterisk click. Click. Click dot asterisk. 6 chambers. 6 bullets in the box on the shelf, wrapped in oilcloth. She hadn't opened that box since Samuel left. Hadn't wanted to see the lead noses winking up at her, patient as waiting dogs. Her thumb pushed the first cartridge into the first chamber. It seeded with a soft asterisk thunk star. The second. The third. Her hand didn't shake. That surprised her. Fourth. Fifth. She paused. The 6th bullet sat in her palm, small and heavy. She could almost feel the powder inside, patient and dry. 6th chamber. Asterisk click dot asterisk. She set the revolver on the table beside the nail. Both of them there, side by side. Things she had used to hold her life together. Things she had used to pretend. The man on the cot made a sound. Not a word. Just breath catching on something sharp. She turned. His eyes were open. He looked at the ceiling first. At the beams. At the hooks where Samuel's traps used to hang. Then his gaze travelled down, slow, like it cost him something, and found her standing by the table. He looked at the revolver. He looked at the nail. He didn't reach for the gun. He didn't flinch or brace or beg. He just looked at her face, and something in his expression shifted. Not recognition. Not gratitude. Just acknowledgement. Like he'd finally found the right address. Samuel Wescott, he said. Her chest closed. I knew him. The name hung in the air between them. Her name. Her husband's name. Spoken by a stranger in her cabin while the evening light bled gold through the window. She didn't speak. Couldn't. Her throat had turned to fence post wood. 8 months ago, he said. Each word cost him. North of the Brazo. Near the crossing at Caddo Creek. She knew the crossing. Samuel had drawn her a map once, tracing the route with his finger on the tablecloth. Asterisk right here. This is where the cattle cross. This is where I'll be dot asterisk. Wasn't my hand, the man said. But I was there. He closed his eyes. His breathing had gone shallow again, like the words had taken everything he had. 3 men. Silas Cole rode point. Silas Cole. She knew that name. Everyone in the valley knew that name. Silas Cole, who wore a deputy's badge but answered to no sheriff. Silas Cole, who collected debts and men and didn't always remember which was which. The man on the cot, Caleb, she would learn later, though he hadn't told her yet, let his hand fall open on the blanket. They're not coming for me, he said. They're coming for what I took from them. He didn't say what that was. She didn't ask. The cricket started. One, then two, then a chorus so loud it seemed to rise from the earth itself. The cabin darkened around the edges. She lit a single candle and placed it on the mantel. Caleb slept. His breathing had steadied, but his fingers twitched against the blanket. Dreaming. Remembering. Running. She sat in Samuel's chair. Her husband's chair. The one with the worn armrest where his elbow had rested 1,000 times. She had sat in it only once since he left, the day the second month passed without a letter. She had cried until her ribs ached. Then she'd washed her face and hung his clean shirt on the line and never sat in the chair again. Until tonight. The revolver was on the table. Loaded now. Ready. She looked at it. Then at the shirt through the window, barely visible now in the fading light. Asterisk you knew. Asterisk. The thought rose up quiet and undeniable. Not from her mind, from somewhere deeper. Somewhere that had known the truth since the first snow melted and Samuel didn't come home. Asterisk you knew. You just didn't want the news to stick. Asterisk. Her fingers touched the nail. Cold. Solid. 341 days. She hadn't been waiting to sell the gun. She hadn't been waiting for a letter. She hadn't been waiting at all. She'd been keeping it warm. Samuel's revolver. Samuel's chair. Samuel's shirt on the line, washed and pressed and bleached by the sun. A grave marker made of cotton and steel. The candle flickered. Caleb murmured something she couldn't understand. Elara picked up the revolver. 6 chambers. 6 bullets. She didn't know yet what she was aiming at. Justice? Memory? The men riding toward her through the dark? All she knew was this. She had spent a year pretending to wait for something that was already gone. Tonight, she stopped pretending. She set the revolver on the windowsill. The cylinder caught the candlelight and held it. 6 tiny gleams like stars held in a circle of steel. Outside, the shirt swayed in the dark. And for the first time in 11 months, Elara Wescott did not look at it. She looked east. Toward the tree line. Toward whatever was coming. Her thumb found the hammer. She was ready. The candle burned down to a stub at 3 in the morning. Elara hadn't moved from Samuel's chair. Her back ached. Her eyes felt like they'd been scoured with sand. But every time she closed them, she saw the shirt on the line, and every time she saw the shirt, she heard Caleb's words again. Asterisk 8 months ago. North of the Brazo. Asterisk. She looked at the man on the cot. His breathing had changed, shallow, quick, the rhythm of someone running in a dream. His fingers plucked at the blanket. Once, twice. Then his whole body tensed and he let out a sound she'd only heard once before, years ago, when a neighbor's horse broke its leg and they'd had to. She stood. Her knees popped. She knelt beside the cot. "You're here," she said. "You're in my cabin. You're safe." His eyes opened but didn't see her. They saw something else. Somewhere else. A creek crossing. Men shouting. Smoke. "Caleb," she said. His breath caught. His gaze found her face. He didn't speak. He just looked at her like she was the first real thing he'd seen in months. She gave him water. He took it. His hand shook, but hers didn't. "Silas Cole," she said. "You said he rode point." Caleb nodded. Just barely. He was deputy in Corpus Christi. 6 years ago. He shot a man in the back outside a saloon and claimed self-defense. The man's widow tried to press charges. She disappeared 3 days later. Caleb's jaw tightened. Samuel wrote me about him. A warning. He said if I ever saw a man with a scar through his left eyebrow, I should cross the street. She paused. "Does Silas have that scar?" Caleb's eyes met hers. "Yes." The silence stretched. Elara stood. She walked to the window. The revolver sat on the sill, cold and patient. Outside, the moon had risen, a fingernail paring, barely enough light to see the tree line. "They want what you took," she said. Not a question. Yes. What was it? Caleb was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen back asleep. Then, a letter. She turned. He was sitting up now, one hand pressed to his ribs, the other gripping the edge of the cot. His face was pale, shining with a thin film of sweat. Samuel wrote it. The night before he died. Silas and his men had been tracking us for 3 days. We didn't know why. We thought it was rustling, or a debt, or just Cole being Cole. He swallowed. But it was the letter. Samuel had something on him. Something he'd found in a safe box in Waco. Names. Dates. Payments. Silas's name, and others, connected to a federal judge and a land office clerk. Proof of a scheme to claim homesteads and sell them back to the families who already lived on them. Elara's fingers found the windowsill. Samuel gave me the letter, Caleb said. Told me to run. Said if I got out, I had to deliver it to the U.S. Marshal in Fort Worth. His voice broke on the next word. He stayed behind so I could carry a piece of paper. The candle guttered and went out. Darkness filled the cabin like well water rising. Elara stood at the window, her reflection a ghost on the glass. Behind her, Caleb's breathing was ragged and wet. She should hate him. She tried to find the hate. Dug for it like a woman searching for the last potato in winter ground. It should be there. This man had ridden away while her husband died. This man had brought killers to her door. This man had slept on Samuel's cot, drunk Samuel's water, worn Samuel's name on his tongue like a confession. She searched her chest for anger and found something else entirely. She found herself. The reflection in the window stared back. Not a farmer. Not a widow. Not a woman waiting for news that would never arrive. A woman who had hammered nails with a gun because she couldn't bear to put it away. A woman who had washed a dead man's shirt for 341 days. A woman who had told herself, every morning, that she was still the person she'd been when Samuel kissed her goodbye at this very door. But she wasn't that person anymore. That person had believed in return. In letters that would eventually come. In husbands who rode north and rode back south. In justice that arrived on its own, without anyone having to load a chamber and wait in the dark. That person had been a child. Elara looked at her reflection and saw a woman she didn't recognize. Older. Harder. Her jaw set in a way it never used to set. Her eyes flat in a way they never used to be. And yet there was something else there, too. Something that had been buried under 11 months of laundry and fence mending and pretending. Something that had gone quiet the day she hung that shirt on the line. Not patience. Not hope. Something with teeth. They'll be here by dawn, Caleb said. Elara didn't turn. I know. You have a choice. You can tell them I came in the night, forced you at gunpoint. You didn't see which direction I rode. And you? I'll take the horse. Lead them east. Give you time. She looked at his reflection in the glass. He was trying to stand. His knuckles were white on the cot frame. He couldn't even walk to the door, let alone outrun 3 armed men. That's not a plan, she said. That's a eulogy. It's the only one I've got. She picked up the revolver. It was warm from the window glass. Warm from the morning sun and the evening cool and all the hours in between. It fit her hand the way the hammer had fit her hand. The way the fence post had fit her hand. The way Samuel's hand had fit hers, once, before she learned that even the best fit can come undone. You brought him here, she said quietly. Caleb didn't answer. You brought Samuel to my door. Not in person, in a story, in a letter, in a name I haven't spoken out loud in 8 months. Her thumb found the hammer. You brought me the truth I'd been hiding from. That he wasn't coming back. That waiting was a lie I told myself because the truth was too heavy to carry. She turned. Caleb stood at the foot of the cot, one hand braced on the wall, his face grey with pain. But his eyes were clear. Steady. I didn't mean to, he said. I just didn't know where else to go. She looked at him. At the man who had run. At the man who had carried her husband's last words across 8 months and 200 miles. "Neither did I," she said. The hourglass on the mantel caught her eye. Samuel had made it. Carved the frame from cedar, sanded it smooth, filled it with sand from the creek bed where he'd proposed. The top was nearly empty. She thought about time. About how she'd spent 11 months watching sand fall, waiting for a moment that had already passed. She thought about Samuel. About his hands on this glass, his breath on her cheek, his voice saying "I'll be back before winter." She thought about the letter. Names and dates and payments. Proof of a scheme that stole homes from people who had built them with their own hands. She thought about Silas Cole, riding toward her cabin with a scar through his eyebrow and a deputy's badge on his chest. And then Elara Wescott realized the quiet was a lie. She hadn't been waiting. She'd been hiding. The homestead wasn't a sanctuary. It was a foxhole. And she wasn't the fox, small and scared and waiting for the dogs to leave. She was the trap. Dawn came grey and still. Elara stood at the window. The revolver hung her side, hidden in the fold of her apron. The nail was in her apron pocket, cold against her thigh. Caleb sat on the edge of the cot. He'd found his boots. Laced them slow, wincing with each breath. "What's your name?" she asked. "Your full name." He looked up. Caleb John Parsons. Born in San Antonio, 1842. Rode with the Confederate cavalry at 19. Been running ever since. She nodded. Stored it away. The first riders appeared at the tree line. 3 men. Horses dark against the grey sky. Sun not yet over the ridge, but close. Close enough. Silas Cole rode in front. Even at this distance, she could see the scar. A white slash through his left eyebrow, catching the early light. Elara stepped through the chipped blue door. The shirt swayed on the line. She didn't look at it. She looked at the men riding toward her home, and she thought, Samuel, you should have aimed lower. Then she walked out to meet them. Elara walked across the yard and she did not hurry. That was the thing about waiting 11 months. You learned that rushing just meant arriving early with your heart pounding. And she was done with her heart pounding over men who rode up from the tree line. The morning was September 13th, 1882. Temperature 58 degrees. Dew heavy on the grass. The chickens scratched at the base of the coop, ignoring everything. Silas Cole reined in 20 feet from the well. His horse was a blood bay, 16 hands, white blaze down its nose. The animal shifted its weight, restless. Silas sat easy in the saddle, one hand resting on his thigh, the other loose on the reins. The scar ran through his left eyebrow like a river through a canyon. "Mrs. Wescott," he said. She stopped at the well. Her hand found the stone coping. Cool and rough. Deputy Cole. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You know why we are here." The 2 men behind him stayed mounted. One was young, maybe 20, with a scattergun across his saddlebow. The other was older, grey at the temples, his hand resting on his holster like a man patting a nervous dog. Elara looked at each of them. Slow. Deliberate. Then she looked back at Silas. "I know you're on my land without an invitation," she said. "I know you've got my fence gate open. And I know it's Tuesday, which means I've got bread in the oven and no time for social calls." Silas's smile thinned. "We are looking for a man. Rode in yesterday. Wounded. You wouldn't happen to have seen him." She tilted her head. Considered. "I saw a man," she said. "At the well. He drank some water and rode on." "Which direction?" "East." The younger man shifted in his saddle. "She's lying." Silas held up one finger. The man went quiet. "East," Silas repeated. "That's interesting. Because we came from east. And we didn't pass any rider." Elara shrugged. "Then you weren't looking hard enough." The silence stretched. Inside the cabin, Behind the chipped blue door, Caleb pressed his back to the wall beside the window. His hand found the rifle. Cold steel. Familiar weight. Elara had told him. Root cellar. There's a slit window facing the east pasture. You wait until I move. Not before ... But he hadn't moved to the cellar yet. He was watching her through the gap in the curtain, and he was learning something he hadn't expected. She was good at this. Not desperate. Not afraid. Just patient. The way a cat is patient. The way a trap is patient. She stood by the well with her hands folded in her apron and lied like she'd been practicing for years. "Search the cabin," Silas said. The older man swung down from his saddle. His boots hit the dust with soft thuds. He was maybe 50, with knuckles that had been broken and healed crooked. He took 3 steps toward the door. "You'll track mud," Elara said. He stopped. "I just swept. And I don't have time to scrub-hoof dirt off my floorboards before the bread burns." The man looked at Silas. Silas looked at Elara. Very slowly, very deliberately, she pulled one hand from her apron and extended it toward the man. "Boots," she said. "Off. On the step. You can leave them by the hammer." The man hesitated. Then he sat on the edge of the porch and pulled off his boots. Caleb moved. Silent as smoke, he crossed the cabin floor. The root cellar door was set into the floorboards by the colt half. He lifted it. No creak. No sound at all. He lowered himself into the darkness. The slit window faced east. Narrow. Just wide enough to see the pasture, the tree line, the well. He settled the rifle against his shoulder and waited. The man crossed the cabin in his sock feet. His name was Thatcher. He had been riding with Silas Cole for 11 years. He had never once been asked to remove his boots before serving a warrant. He searched the main room. The cot. The table. The cold half. He opened the cupboard. Flour. Salt. Dried beans. He opened the trunk at the foot of the cot. Quilts. A man's wool coat, neatly folded. A child's christening gown, yellowed with age, tucked in tissue paper. No outlaw. He walked to the back door. Checked the latch. Looked out at the empty yard. "Nobody here," he said. Silas's jaw tightened. Elara hadn't moved from the well. The younger man, his name was Potter, and he was already regretting signing on for this, kept glancing at the tree line like he expected someone to ride out of it. "Mrs. Wescott," Silas said. His voice had lost its polish. "I'm going to ask you one more time." "I already answered." "You answered with a story. I'm asking for the truth." She looked at him. Steady. Unblinking. "The truth," she said, "is that I've been standing at this well for 11 months waiting for my husband to come home. And he didn't. And nobody came to tell me why." Her voice didn't crack. Didn't rise. "The truth is that yesterday a man fell off his horse and bled on my coping stone, and I carried him inside because that's what my mother taught me to do when someone is dying at your door." She paused. "The truth is that he told me what happened to Samuel, which is more than any lawman ever did." Silas's horse shifted. The deputy's hand drifted toward his holster. "That man is a thief and a fugitive. That man carried my husband's last words 200 miles with a bullet in his side. He's wanted. He's a witness." The word hung in the air. Silas stared at her. His face was very still. Very controlled. A witness to what? Elara reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out the nail. It was just a nail. Bent slightly. Rust flecking the head. Nothing special. She held it up between thumb and forefinger. "You ever hammer a nail with the butt of a pistol, deputy?" He didn't answer. "It works," she said. "But it leaves marks. Scars. You can see them if you look close." She turned the nail slowly, letting the morning light catch the dents in the head. "Samuel's gun has marks like that. From me. From the day I stopped waiting and started fixing what was broken around here." She closed her fingers around the nail. You want the man who carried Samuel's letter? He's not here. Silas's eyes narrowed. But I am, she said. And I know what was in that letter. Names, dates, payments, a federal judge in Waco, a land office clerk in Corpus, and a deputy sheriff who collects debts for men in clean suits. Potter's scattergun wavered. Thatcher, still sock-footed on the porch, went very still. Silas Cole looked at Elara Wescott, looked at the nail in her hand, looked at her face, wind-burned, steady, absolutely calm. And for the first time in 20 years, Silas Cole was afraid of a woman standing by a well. "Where is the letter?" he said. "On its way to Fort Worth." "That's a lie." "Is it?" Caleb watched through the slit window. The east pasture was empty. The tree line was quiet. But he could see Silas's face, and he could see Elara's back, and he could see the moment when the deputy's hand closed around his gun. Asterisk now asterisk, he thought. Asterisk do it now dot asterisk. Elara didn't move. She stood at the well with a nail in her hand and a revolver hidden in her apron and 6 chambers loaded with 11 months of waiting. Silas's pistol cleared leather. The rifle shot cracked the morning open. Silas's had lifted clean off his head and landed in the dust 3 feet away. He froze. His hand still on the grip. His face white. "Next one goes lower," Caleb called from the cellar slit. "And I've got her husband's eyesight." Elara drew the Remington from her apron. It came up smooth. Natural. Like she'd been born with it in her hand. She aimed at Silas Cole's chest. "You came to my home," she said. "You asked for a man. I gave you the truth, and you reached for your gun anyway." Her thumb found the hammer. "I stopped being a girl 11 months ago, deputy." She pulled it back. Asterisk click dot asterisk. The hammer clicked back. Silas stared down the barrel. Potter's scattergun was pointing at the ground. Thatcher hadn't moved from the porch. The morning was very quiet. And Elara Wescott, who had spent a year waiting for someone else to arrive, stood in her own yard and aimed her husband's revolver at the man who killed him. Her finger found the trigger. The moment hung. Then the sound of hoofbeats came from the east. Fast. Coming hard. Everyone turned. A rider crested the ridge. Sunlight caught a badge on his chest. He reined in hard, dust rising around him in a brown cloud. "U.S. Marshal," he called out. "Everyone lower their weapons." Elara didn't lower hers. She looked at Silas. Silas looked at the marshal. The marshal looked at the nail on the ground, the hat in the dust, the woman with the steady hands. "Mrs. Wescott," the marshal said, "I received a letter this morning, delivered by a boy on a mule. Said you had information regarding a conspiracy to defraud homesteaders." Elara's finger stayed on the trigger. "That letter," she said, "was written by my husband. 8 months ago. North of the Brazo." The marshal nodded slowly. "Yes'm. I know." He looked at Silas. "Deputy Cole, you're under arrest." Silas didn't move. His horse shifted. His hand was still on his gun. The marshal's hand was on his. The morning held its breath. And Elara Wescott, standing at the well with Samuel's revolver warm in her palm, realized that the letter had arrived. Not the one Silas was looking for. The one she'd written last night, by candlelight, while Caleb slept. The one she'd given to the neighbor boy at first light, along with $3 and a promise. The one that said, "Asterisk, come quick. I have evidence of federal crimes. The man who killed my husband is at my door. Asterisk." Silas saw it in her face. His hand dropped from his holster. "This isn't over," he said. Elara looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It is." She lowered the Remington. The hammer eased forward. 6 chambers. 6 bullets. She hadn't fired a single one. The marshal took Silas Cole away. Potter and Thatcher followed, leading Silas's horse. None of them looked back. Elara stood at the well until the dust settled. Then she walked to the cabin. Caleb was sitting on the porch steps, lacing his boots. The rifle leaned against the wall beside him. "You could have shot him," he said. "I know." "Why didn't you?" She looked at the revolver in her hand, at the nail still lying in the dust by the well, at the shirt on the line, swaying gently in the September breeze. "Because Samuel didn't marry a killer," she said, "and I'm still the woman he married." She held out her hand. Caleb looked at it, then at her face. He took it. She pulled him to his feet. The sun climbed higher. The chicken scratched. The bread in the oven — there was never actually bread in the oven — remained unbaked. But the shirt on the line caught the wind and bellied out, full and clean. And for the first time in 11 months, Elara Wescott looked at it and thought, that's just laundry. She had other work to do now. The dust from the marshal's horses took a long time to settle. Elara stood at the well long after the last rider disappeared into the trees. The Remington hung her side, barrel warm from the morning sun. Her fingers were still curved around the grip. It took her a moment to remember how to let go. She set the revolver on the stone coping. The nail was still in the dust where it had fallen. She bent slow, her knees aching from the night in Samuel's chair, and picked it up. It was just a nail. Bent. Rust flecking the head. Nothing special. But it had held the fence post together for 6 months. And she had pulled it out with her own 2 hands. Caleb sat on the porch steps. His boots were on. His shirt was buttoned. Her shirt, one of Samuel's old work shirts she'd found in the trunk. It hung loose on his shoulders. He was still pale, still pressing his hand to his ribs when he thought she wasn't looking. But he was sitting up, breathing, watching the empty tree line. "Marshall didn't arrest me," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I ran." "You delivered the letter." He was quiet. His fingers found the edge of the bandage beneath his shirt. 8 months, he said. "Took me 8 months to get it to Fort Worth. Samuel gave it to me at sunrise. I didn't walk into the marshal's office until November." Elara didn't answer. She walked past him, through the chipped blue door, into the cabin. The hourglass on the mantel had run out. She hadn't noticed when. Sometime in the night, maybe. The top chamber was empty. The sand had all fallen. She picked it up, turned it over. The sand began to flow again. She stood in the center of the cabin and looked at everything. Samuel's chair, the worn armrest, the trunk at the foot of the cot, the hooks on the wall where his traps used to hang, the shelf with the oilcloth box, now empty, all 6 bullets loaded into the revolver by the well. 27 days since Silas Cole rode up from the tree line. 27 days since she'd picked up the hammer and decided she wasn't going to be the woman who waited anymore. 27 days since she'd become someone else. Caleb appeared in the doorway. "I should go," he said. She didn't turn around. "Where?" "Fort Worth. The marshal said he needs a statement. Names, dates, everything I remember." "Then you should go." He didn't move. "I could come back," he said. "After. If you need help with the fence. Or the roof before winter." She looked at the nail in her palm. The fence post still sagged without it. She'd seen it this morning, leaning east, the wood splintered around the empty hole. She could hammer it back in. Right now. Pick up the hammer and fix what was broken. But she didn't. "The roof can wait," she said. "The fence can wait." She closed her fingers around the nail. "I've spent 11 months fixing things that didn't need fixing. Hammering nails that weren't the problem." Caleb waited. She turned to face him. "You should go to Fort Worth," she said. "You should tell the marshal everything. You should testify. Put Silas Cole in a cell and throw away the key." He nodded. "And then," she said, "you should find something to do that isn't running." He left at noon. His horse had rested. The wound was healing, not healed, but healing. enough to carry a man 200 miles north. Elara stood at the well and watched him saddle up, watched him check the cinch, watched him slide the rifle into the boot. He swung into the saddle, winced, settled. "Mrs. Wescott," he said. "Elara." He nodded. "Elara." She waited. "I'm sorry," he said, "for bringing them here, for bringing you the news, for all of it." She looked at him, at the man who had carried her husband's last words across 8 months and 200 miles, at the man who had bled on her well stone and slept on her husband's cot. "You brought me the truth," she said. "That's not something to apologize for." He rode east. She watched until the tree line swallowed him, until the dust settled, until the afternoon light shifted from gold to amber. Then she walked to the fence line. The post sagged. She'd said it herself, 2 years ago, when Samuel was still here. They dug the hole together. He'd held the post upright while she shoveled the dirt back in, his hands over hers on the shovel handle. "Asterisk straight enough asterisk," he'd said. "Asterisk she'll hold dot asterisk." She'd believed him. She knelt in the grass. The nail was warm in her palm. The hammer was on the porch step where she'd left it. She picked up the hammer. She looked at the nail. Then she set them both down in the grass. The post could wait. The roof could wait. Everything she'd been holding together with nails and hope and her husband's revolver could wait. Because it turned out that waiting wasn't the same as living. And she was done waiting. She walked to the clothesline. The shirt hung there. Blue chambray. Sleeves pinned straight. Buttons polished. Fading now, after 11 months of sun and wind and Tuesday washings. She unpinned it. The fabric was soft in her hands. Light. It had been washed so many times it barely smelled like Samuel anymore. She folded it. Neat. Careful. She carried it inside. The trunk at the foot of the cot opened with the same soft creak it had always made. She laid the shirt inside. Folded it one more time. Smoothing the collar. Straightening the sleeves. She closed the lid. The afternoon stretched long. She swept the floor. Washed the breakfast dishes. Fed the chickens. Pulled a few weeds from the vegetable patch. Normal things. Ordinary things. Things that women did when they were waiting for their husbands to come home. But she wasn't waiting anymore. She was just living. The sun began to sink toward the ridge. Elara stood at the window. The Remington sat on the sill, cylinder open, empty. 6 chambers waiting for whatever came next. She didn't know what that was. She didn't know if she'd load them again. Didn't know if she'd sell the gun, or keep it, or wrap it in oilcloth and bury it under the fence post. She didn't know if Caleb would come back. Didn't know if Silas Cole would spend the rest of his life in a cell or talk his way out and come riding up from the tree line again. She didn't know if the roof would hold through winter. Didn't know if the fence would make it to spring. She didn't know anything. But she was standing at her own window, in her own cabin, on her own land. And that was enough. The fingernail moon rose. Same sky. Same ridge. Same cabin she'd woken up in every morning for 368 days since Samuel left. But different. Because she wasn't looking west anymore. She wasn't watching the trail. Wasn't listening for hoofbeats. Wasn't counting the sand in the hourglass and pretending it wasn't running out. She was looking at her own 2 hands. The same hands that had hammered nails and loaded chambers and pulled a stranger through her door. The same hands that had held Samuel's face on the morning he rode north. The same hands that had folded his shirt and closed the trunk lid and chosen, finally, to stop waiting. She picked up the nail. It was still bent. Still rusted. Still just a nail. But it was hers. She'd pulled it. She'd held it. She'd carried it in her apron pocket through the longest morning of her life. She didn't need to hammer it back in. She just needed to keep it. To remember. The cabin settled around her. The timbers creaked. The wind pushed at the windows. Somewhere, far off, A coyote called out to the rising moon. Elara set the nail on the mantel beside the hourglass. The sand was still falling. Steady, patient, certain. She didn't know how much was left, but for the first time in 11 months, she wasn't watching it fall. She was thinking about tomorrow, about the fence post, about the roof, about the garden she wanted to plant in the spring, about the life she still had, right here, waiting for her to live it. She blew out the candle. The cabin went dark. The moon silvered the window. The Remington caught the light and held it, 6 empty chambers gleaming soft. Elara lay down in her own bed. Not Samuel's chair. Not the cot by the cold hearth. Her bed. Her blankets. Her pillow. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in 368 days, she didn't dream of riders coming home. She dreamed of morning. The sun rose. September 14th, 1882. Temperature 61 degrees. Wind out of the southeast. Elara Wescott woke up. She washed her face, braided her hair, put on her boots. She walked outside. The chickens were scratching at the coop. The grass was wet with dew. The fence post was still sagging, the hammer still lying in the grass beside it. She didn't pick it up. Not yet. But she stood in her own yard, in the cool morning light, and looked at the sky. It was blue, wide, full of promise. She breathed in. She breathed out. And then Elara Wescott, who had spent a year waiting for her life to start again, realized something. It already had. She just hadn't been paying attention. She walked to the well. The Remington was on the sill, right where she'd left it. Cylinder open. Empty. She looked at it. Then she looked at her reflection in the window glass. The same woman who had hammered nails with a gun butt. The same woman who had loaded 6 chambers and aimed at a killer. The same woman who had stood in her own yard and refused to become someone she didn't recognize. She smiled. Just a little. Just at the corners. Then she turned away from the window, walked through the chipped blue door, and got on with her day. The nail stayed on the mantel. The shirt stayed in the trunk. The revolver stayed on the sill, empty chambers waiting for whatever came next. And Elara Wescott stayed in her cabin, on her land, in her life. Not waiting. Living. It turned out there wasn't much difference, really. Except everything.